All right, here we go. We're going to make a basketball for a basketball chocolate mold. It is step 3 of the chocolate mold project. And so I'm going to walk you through what is meant to be a basketball. So we're going to start in Inventor with a brand new part file. And let's go ahead and create a sketch. And I'm going to throw it on the front plane right here. If you choose a different plane, that's fine. And we'll start with a line. And I'm going to start at the origin. It's good practice to start at that 0, 0, 0 point. And I'm going to make that line 1.5 inches because I'm going to give my basketball a diameter of 1.5. So that'll dictate that right there. I'm going to use the 3-point arc, and I'll come to the top of the line, and I'm going to come down to the bottom line, and I'm going to bring it out, and it's going to have to be exact, perfect circle. Now, I could try to guess on exactly where that was and be pretty close, so I'm going to intentionally not be perfect, because I'm going to put a dimension in there to make it perfect. So the radius of this arc needs to be exactly half of the diameter of that circle. So we'll say 0.75, and now it's perfect. Right, you'll see the center point is right on that line. Okay, now to turn that into a sphere, we're going to go to 3D Model and Revolve. And it should auto-select the little half circle. And it's asking what do we want to use for our axis. And I'll choose that line right here. And it's going to revolve it around 360 degrees, and it's going to make that sphere. Okay. Now we're going to put a little text on the front of it for kicks. So I'm going to click plane. And I'm going to go over here to the origin on the left side, and I'm going to hit the plus next to it. And I'm going to choose the front plane, which is going to, in this case, it's going to be the XY plane. And that's going to put it right in the middle of the sphere, but that's not actually what I want. I'm going to come right up to the front of the sphere, and what it's going to do, it's going to project that plane right onto the front, and you'll see I went ahead and clicked and it put it there, and you'll see that it's perfectly tangent right to the front face of that sphere, which is super convenient because that's what I wanted. Now I'm going to start a sketch on that front plane, and it's going to allow me to look right at it. And we're going to start a text box. And we'll just kind of draw a text box over the area where we're hoping the text is going to be. Something like that. And then you can write whatever the first thing is that comes into your mind. I'm sure we're all thinking the same thing. But if you put in whatever you want, and we'll say OK, then you'll see that the text does show up here. But it's not centered, and maybe it's too big, or maybe it's too small. And so we're going to go ahead and modify it. But if you'll notice, I still have a plus sign as my cursor because I'm still in text box mode. And if I start clicking now, all I'm going to do is create a whole bunch more text boxes. And that's not what I want. So I'm going to right click and say OK. And that's going to finish the text box mode. Now I can go to my text in here, and I'm going to double click on it. And I'm going to highlight it. Okay, if I don't highlight it, then the things you do to it won't actually happen. So I'll highlight it, and I'm going to make it a little bit bigger. I'm going to try a 0.2 for the font. I'm going to tell it to be centered horizontally and centered vertically. And I'm going to go ahead and tell it to be bold also. And then when we hit OK, it's going to look something like that. Okay, mine happens to fit perfectly. If yours is a little too big or a little too small, feel free to go back in and change the size until it does fit better. Okay, then what we're going to do is we want that text to end up on the sphere. We're going to go to 3D Model, and I'm going to have you use a feature called Emboss. Now, you have two options. You have what's called Emboss, and you have Engrave. And they're basically the same thing. Emboss adds material. Engrave removes material. And you're welcome to do either one you want. Whatever you do, we're going to do a very subtle amount. So if you wanted to bring some material out or put some material in, I might engrave mine. Okay? And I'm going to do something very small, like maybe 3/100ths of an inch. Just nice, small little engrave. And then I want to look at it, because if I'm engraving, it needs to go into the material. So we've got these two arrows here, where it's either going in or out of the material. And I have not yet chosen the profile, which is going to be my text, because you'll see that the OK is not highlighted yet. So I'm going to go to Profile, and I'm going to choose the text. Now you can see that the arrow is actually coming away, which would be fine if I was on Emboss, but I'm not. I'm planning on engraving. So I'm going to have to switch the arrow so it's going into this sphere. And when I hit OK, then it's going to engrave my text in there, and it goes with the curvature of that sphere. Okay? So now I've got my little sphere with my text on it. What we're going to do now, because I said it was going to be a basketball, we're going to put some seams on it. Now, if you think of a real basketball, the seams on those are actually quite complex. We're not going to be quite that fancy, but we're going to make something that will suffice as seams. So in order to do that, I'm going to need to get some more work planes and maybe even a work axis on this. And so we'll show you how to do that. So I'm going to create a new plane. So I click on plane. I'm going to come over to the origin, and there's the YZ plane that goes right through it. I'm going to click, and it's actually exactly what I want. So I'm just going to click on that little yellow circle. When I click and hold on it, it gives me the option to offset the circle one way or the other, but I don't want to. So I'm just going to say OK, and now the work plane is going to stay there. I'm going to do the exact same thing with the XY plane. I'm going to click. I'm going to go click and hold on the yellow corner, and I'm not actually going to offset it. Okay? Now the last one I am going to have to change just a little bit, and you'll see why. I'm going to do a plane, and I'm going to come to that XZ. Now what you will see is it's actually on the bottom. And I don't want it on the bottom, I want it centered. And that's just based how I did the initial sketch. So I'm going to click and hold on the little yellow corner, and I'm going to offset it up. And if you remember, the diameter of the sphere was 1.5 inches. So I'm going to come up 0.75, and it's possible it might be a negative 0.75 for you. For me, it's a positive, but maybe yours will be a negative. But that'll be halfway up the sphere, and I'll say OK. And those are the 3 planes I want. Really, this plane on the front, I don't really need it anymore. Now, I don't want to delete it, because I used it for the sketch on there in the engrave. So I can't delete it because that'll cause problems, but I can right-click on it and turn off its visibility. Okay, so now I have this basketball with 3 planes going through it. Now, what will also be convenient when we're trying to make our seams and revolving is an axis that happens to go right through it, like a north, right through the north-south poles. And so I'm going to click on axis, and I'm going to say, hey, I want my axis to go through this plane, but I also want it to go through this plane. And if I do that, the only place the axis could be is where those 2 planes crisscross. Okay, so now I have this axis that is perfectly centered right through the middle of my sphere. All right, let's go make a seam. So I'm going to start a sketch, and I'm going to go ahead and put it on this front plane right here. And this one, we're going to do a couple different things. I'm going to slice graphics so I can look inside of it. So I'm going to right click and say slice graphics. And I'm going to project the geometry of this outside circle. When I click on it, what it does is it activates that circle. It'll turn yellow, and we can now use it. Okay? But what I also want to do is I'm going to make a circle, one that's slightly smaller than the one I activated, and one that's slightly bigger than the one I activated. Actually, yeah, we'll do that. And I'm going to dimension these guys. I'm going to say from there to there. It's just something small. How about 0.02? Sorry, 0.02 inches. And we'll do the same thing here. Oops, come on. Dimension from there to there. And we'll say 0.02 again. Okay. So we have a circle that's slightly bigger, a circle that's slightly smaller. And we're going to go to extrude. And I'm going to go choose that space and the lower space. So both of them are selected. Now right now it's going to extrude it out a full inch. Well, that's not what I want. Again, I want something very small, like maybe 0.02. And I want it to extrude both ways. So if I say symmetric, it's going to extrude, it's going to take the 0.02, and it's going to extrude it half one way and half the other way. And 0.02 maybe enough, and maybe too short. We'll see. I'm going to hit OK. And when I hit OK, it brings in my seam, and it brings back the part that we had hidden by using slice graphics. So you can see the seam. If you want your seam to be thicker or thinner, you're welcome to change it. You can just go back to that extrusion and right-click and say Feature. And you could change that 0.02 to something else. Maybe I'm going to make mine a 0.03. You don't need to. It doesn't matter. It's purely for looks. Okay, so there's my seam. Now, I would have to do the same thing several times to get the other seams unless I run a pattern. And I have a central axis that this all goes through. So I'm going to go up to Circular Pattern. And the feature that I'm using is going to be that seam. And the rotational axis is going to be the center axis. And you're going to see that it patterns that. Now, it always defaults to a pattern of 6. And you might look and be like, oh, it kind of looks like there's 6, but really there's 3 here. If I change this pattern to 3, you're going to see that it's no different. But by having 6, it just doubled up. There were patterns on top of patterns. You couldn't tell because they're right on top of each other. But really, we can just run this pattern with 3. If you run it with 6, it's not going to cause a problem. But I just changed mine to 3. And we'll hit OK. And now we have something that looks kind of like a basketball. And it's got some text on it. And what we're going to do is we'll use this for our next step of making the chocolate mold. Now, the one more thing you're going to need for the next step is going to be just a solid cube that is slightly bigger than this. And if you remember, this had a diameter of 1.5 inches. So I'm going to go and make that cube right now. And so I'm going to open up a brand new part file. And we'll start a sketch. And I'm going to make myself a little rectangle starting at the origin. And it's going to be 2 inches tall. And it's going to be 2 inches wide. And it's going to be, when we do the extrusion, yes, 2 inches deep. All right, you have a nice little cube. It's going to look something like that. Now, for the sake of being able to see through this cube later, because we're going to put that basketball inside of it, and it's going to be nice to be able to see it, let's make it translucent. So you're going to go up to Default up at the top, and we're going to change the material to something. I like the clears. Okay, there's blue, green, yellow, light, whatever you want. I usually go with blue or green. And that's going to make it translucent, and that's going to allow us to assemble it together for the next step of the chocolate mold. But that's it for this step.